So here I am, 10 years into a marriage I once believed was unshakable, and suddenly it's falling apart before my eyes. Funny how life works, isn't it? You spend years convinced you've got it all figured out, only to realize you were blind to the truth the whole time. Lila and I were that couple everyone looked up to, or so I thought. We traveled the world together, ran marathons side by side, and bonded over hobbies like hiking and cooking. Felt like we were living the dream. At least that's what I kept telling myself. But life doesn't play fair. Work started demanding more of me. Long hours, more responsibility, you know the drill. It wasn't like I was neglecting our marriage, but apparently in her eyes I wasn't enough. That's when I started noticing the changes. She grew impatient, snapping at me like I was an irritant she couldn't shake off. I'd come home drained but still ready to make an effort. And there she'd be, glued to her phone or lost in some trashy reality show. Anytime I tried to strike up a conversation, she'd give me that infamous eye roll and say, "Do we really have to talk about this right now?" The complaints started not long after. At first, they seemed reasonable enough. "We don't go out like we used to," or "Why don't you plan anything fun anymore?" Sure, maybe I was slipping up, but then it got personal. "You've become so predictable, Ethan. You're boring." That one cut deep. I never thought I'd be the guy whose wife called him boring. But there it was, dropped on me like a ton of bricks. So I tried. I really tried. I planned a romantic weekend getaway, thinking maybe we needed a reset, a chance to rekindle what we once had. You know what she said? "I can't just drop everything for a vacation. I've got work." The excuses never stopped. There was always something more important than us. Then the late nights began. "Work's been crazy, babe," she'd say. "I need to stay late." And the business trips, those became more frequent, too. At first, I didn't think much of it. Lila had always been ambitious, more focused on her career than I was, if I'm being honest. But then things started to feel off. She'd come home from the gym looking like she was ready for a night out, not like someone who'd just been working out. And then there was her wardrobe, new clothes, expensive ones. Dresses, lingerie, makeup she hadn't bothered with in years. It wasn't for me. That much was obvious. I tried brushing it off. I didn't want to be that paranoid husband who jumped to conclusions. But her behavior kept gnawing at me. She started coming home later and later, sometimes not even walking through the door until the middle of the night. When I asked where she'd been, she'd get defensive. "Don't you trust me? I'm working hard for us," she'd snap, making me feel like the bad guy for even asking. And then there was that night. I sat there waiting for her, watching the clock, checking my phone every few minutes, sending her texts she didn't bother replying to. By midnight, my stomach was in knots. I even convinced myself something terrible might have happened. Maybe she'd been in an accident, maybe something worse. But deep down, that gnawing feeling of suspicion wouldn't let me go. When she finally walked in around 1 a.m., she acted like nothing was wrong. Her excuse? A vague work emergency.
No epalegi. No explanation.
Just business as usual. The next day, she left for work and forgot her phone on the kitchen counter. And yeah, I know it was wrong. I shouldn't have gone through it. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. So I picked it up and opened it. And there it was. A message from Jason. Jason. Some guy from her office whose name I'd heard in passing but hadn't thought much about. The message wasn't subtle. "Last night was fun. Let's do it again soon," winking-faced. That stupid winky face. My stomach dropped. My hands started shaking. For a second, I thought about throwing her phone across the room, but I didn't. Instead, I put it back exactly where I found it and tried to breathe. I didn't confront her immediately. I wanted to. I really did. But I needed to cool off and figure out what I was going to do. My mind was spinning, replaying every excuse she'd ever given me, every late night, every trip, every gym session. It all made sense now, and I felt like the biggest idiot in the world for not seeing it sooner. That night, when she got home, I didn't say a word. I just sat there watching her. She didn't even notice. Too busy on her phone, probably texting Jason and laughing at whatever inside joke they had. And there I was, sitting across from her, trying not to explode. It's insane how quickly things can fall apart. One minute you think you're living this solid, stable life, and the next you realize it was all a lie. But I knew one thing for sure, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. After seeing that message, I couldn't just sit there and let it go. My gut told me there was more, and I needed to know the truth. You know that feeling when something's wrong, even if you don't have all the proof yet? That was me. Every late night, every work trip, every excuse. It felt like a knife twisting deeper every time. Lila had always been into fitness, but now it was excessive. She was at the gym for hours, coming home in those skin-tight outfits, looking way too polished for someone who'd just been working out. Then there were the new clothes, dresses, lingerie, expensive makeup. It was obvious she wasn't doing this for me. I tried to ignore it, but I couldn't. One night, I decided to check her phone again, but she'd changed her password. That hit me like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just hiding something. She was making sure I couldn't find out. That's when I realized I couldn't sit around anymore. I wasn't going to let her make a fool of me. So I did what I had to do. I hired a private investigator. Yeah, I know it sounds extreme, but when your entire life starts feeling like a lie, you do what you need to do. I wasn't going to let her lies tear me apart without knowing the full truth. Watching your wife slip away, knowing something is wrong but not having the answers will drive you insane. You'll do whatever it takes to uncover the truth. Hiring a private investigator wasn't cheap, but at this point I didn't care. I was desperate. A few days later, the PI delivered, and when I saw what they sent, it gutted me. The PI sent over photos, cold, hard proof. There she was, my wife of 10 years, sitting at a cozy restaurant with Jason, holding his hand like some love-struck teenager. I kept scrolling through the pictures, each one making my stomach twist tighter. And then I saw it. They were kissing right there in public.
Nos cham. No hesitaschen.
Just two people acting like the world didn't exist. This wasn't some friendly peck either. It was a passionate kiss, the kind of kiss she hadn't given me in who knows how long. I stared at those photos for what felt like hours. I didn't cry. I didn't yell. I didn't smash anything. I just sat there, frozen, staring at the evidence that shattered everything I thought I knew. This wasn't a suspicion anymore. This was real. She was with him, and she didn't even care enough to try to hide it. The next morning, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I had to confront her. I waited until she came back from one of her so-called work trips. She walked in with that same fake smile, chatting like everything was normal, like she wasn't tearing my life apart behind my back. That fake happiness made my blood boil. How could she sit there, acting like we were still fine, after what I'd just seen? I waited until she was settled on the couch before I said anything. I didn't shout. I didn't lose my temper. I pulled out my phone, opened the photos, and handed it to her. My voice was calm, but cold. Care to explain this? She didn't flinch. She didn't gasp or try to defend herself. She looked at the pictures, then back at me, and she shrugged. I'm not interested in doing this anymore, Ethan, she said. Her voice so flat and cold it made my chest ache.
No guilt. No apology.
Nothing.
I stared her, dumbfounded.
What the hell are you talking about? I asked, barely able to get the words out. She sighed like I was the one wasting her time. I'm tired of this boring life. You're not the man I married. That hit me like a freight train. What the hell is that supposed to mean? When we got married, you were fun. We traveled. We partied. We did things. But now, you're just predictable. You come home from work and do the same thing every day. There's no excitement.
No pasión.
I'm not interested in living like this anymore. Her words cut me deeper than any knife. I felt the anger bubbling up, but I kept it together. So that's it? You cheat on me because you're bored. She didn't even blink. I didn't cheat, Ethan. I'm done with this marriage. I've already filed for divorce. Divorce. That word hit me harder than anything else. While I was sitting here trying to figure out how to save what we had, she'd already moved on. She'd made her choice, and I hadn't even seen it coming. You filed for divorce? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. I told you I'm done. I want to live fully, and I can't do that with you anymore. You're stuck in this monotonous routine, and I'm not wasting any more time trying to fix it. I sat there stunned. She was done. Just like that. 10 years of marriage, of building a life together, of creating memories, the highs and the lows, all of it. None of it mattered to her anymore. She was ready to walk away, and she didn't even care. That was the moment something in me snapped. The pain, the betrayal, the humiliation. It was all too much. But underneath it, I felt something else. Anger. Rage. You think you can just walk away like that? I asked, my voice low and cold. She crossed her arms and gave me a look that made my blood boil. I'm not asking your permission, Ethan. This is happening, whether you like it or not. I clenched my fists, doing everything I could to hold my temper in check. We'll see about that. She smirked, her face full of smugness. You don't have a choice. But she was wrong. I did have a choice, and I wasn't about to let her walk away without facing the consequences of what she'd done. For days after the confrontation, I was in a fog, replaying everything over and over in my head. How had it come to this? Could I have done something differently? Should I have noticed the signs sooner? But no matter how much I thought about it, the truth was staring me in the face. Lila had chosen this. She decided to betray me. She chose Jason over me, while I was still out here believing we had a future. That's the thing about betrayal, it doesn't just hurt. Transforms you. That pain, that gut-wrenching agony. It twists into something darker. For me, it became rage. A burning, all-consuming anger. I wasn't going to let her walk away like this. Not after everything we'd been through. Not after what she'd done to me. And then an idea came to me. Sylvia. Her mom. Sylvia and I had always gotten along. She'd been one of the few people who could see through Lila's facade over the years. Sylvia had even told me once that she didn't trust how close Lila and Jason seemed. At the time, I brushed it off, thinking she was just being overly protective. But now I realized she'd been right all along. As I sat there, drowning in anger and betrayal, the thought of reaching out to Sylvia started to take shape. Maybe it was the wine talking, or maybe it was just the need to do something, but it felt like the right move. I didn't just want to tell her about the divorce. I wanted her to understand what Lila had done. Maybe, just maybe, she'd help me figure out my next step. I picked up the phone and called her. She answered immediately, concern in her voice. Sylvia had always liked me more than Lila, if I'm being honest. When I asked if I could come by to talk, she didn't hesitate. She told me to come over right away. Lila thought she could walk away without consequences, but she was about to learn how wrong she was. Better times seemed like a distant memory. As I sat across from Sylvia, I started spilling everything. The affair, the photos, the confrontation, every last detail. She listened intently, shaking her head with a mix of disappointment and disgust at her daughter's actions. I knew it, Sylvia said finally, pouring me a generous glass of wine. I always had a bad feeling about Jason. I just didn't want to believe Lila could be so reckless. I nodded, sipping the wine, the bitterness rising in my chest. It's more than reckless, Sylvia. She's thrown everything away. She's filed for divorce. And I didn't even see it coming. Sylvia reached out, her hand squeezing mine firmly. Her eyes softened with sympathy. Ethan, I'm so sorry. You deserve so much better than this. Truly. That's when it began, that flicker of something between us, subtle but undeniable. I'd noticed it before, but I'd never acted on it. Sylvia had always been an attractive woman, and since her husband passed, she carried this air of vulnerability. And me? I was broken enough to notice it in a way I shouldn't have. Maybe even to take advantage of it. We talked for hours, one bottle of wine turning into two, the conversation growing deeper and more personal with every sip. I told her things I'd never admitted to anyone. How betrayed I felt, how stupid I'd been, how angry and lost I was. Sylvia listened, nodding, her words comforting me in a way I didn't realize I needed. Then she opened up too. She shared memories of her marriage, confessions of how lonely she'd been since her husband passed, and regrets about choices she wished she'd made differently. Somewhere along the way, the air between us shifted. Sylvia's hand lingered on mine longer than before. Her laughter became softer, her gaze more intense. She was flirting, and I didn't stop her. In fact, I leaned into it. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had some semblance of control. Revenge was staring me in the face, and it looked like her. Before I even realized what was happening, Sylvia leaned in, her lips brushing against mine. I didn't stop her. I didn't hesitate. I pulled her closer. It felt surreal, like I was outside my own body, watching the scene unfold. But in that moment, I wasn't just indulging. I was plotting. I wanted Lila to know. I needed her to know. The next morning, I woke up with a strange clarity. I thought I'd feel guilt or regret, maybe shame. But there was nothing, just cold emptiness. What I did with Sylvia wasn't about attraction or even comfort. It was about taking back power. After Lila ripped apart my life, I needed to find a way to regain control. I had the video saved in multiple places. I wasn't stupid enough to rely on just one copy. That video wasn't just proof of what happened. It was leverage. It was the key to making Lila feel even a fraction of what I'd felt. When someone betrays you like that, your mind goes to places you never thought it would. Right and wrong stop matching. All you can think about is making them pay. That day, I waited for Lila to come home. The plan was set in motion. When she finally walked through the door, I didn't waste time with pleasantries or small talk. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steady. Too calm for the chaos that was about to erupt. She raised an eyebrow, probably thinking this was another argument about the divorce or Jason. She had no idea what was coming. I pulled out my phone and hit play. The video filled the screen, and the color drained from her face. Her jaw dropped, and for a moment, she was completely frozen. "Do you see this, Lila?" I asked, my tone eerily calm as my finger hovered over the screen. "This is your mother and me, together." Her reaction was everything I'd hoped for. Her face turned ghostly white. Her eyes widened in shock as her mouth worked, trying to form words that wouldn't come. Finally, she managed to snatch the phone out of my hand, but it didn't matter. I had backups. She could smash that phone into pieces, but it wouldn't erase what I had. "You're sick," she spat, her voice trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. "How could you? How could you?" I cut her off, leaning forward. "Don't act like a victim now, Lila. I'm not the one who started this. You did. You threw away our marriage. You didn't care about me, about us, about anything we built. So don't stand there and act self-righteous." Her hands shook as she clenched them into fists. "This is disgusting. You're disgusting. How could you even think of doing this with my mother?" I didn't blink. I wasn't going to let her twist this into my fault. "Let's be clear, Lila. This isn't about your mother. It's about you. You destroyed our marriage, and now you're going to face the consequences." I leaned back, my voice colder than I thought possible. "Here's the deal. I have this video saved in multiple places. If you don't agree to sign over your share of the house, I'll make sure it goes viral. Everyone will see it, your friends, your coworkers, your family, and yes, even Sylvia. Imagine what people will think. Imagine what they'll say." Her eyes were wild with anger and fear, but I saw the crack. She was trapped, and she knew it. "You wouldn't," she whispered, her voice barely audible, more like she was trying to convince herself than challenge me. I didn't flinch. "Oh, I would. And you know I will." Tears welled in her eyes as her defenses crumbled. For a brief moment, I almost felt pity. Almost. But the memory of her betrayal snuffed it out as quickly as it came. "What's it going to be?" I asked, my voice sharp, cutting through her sobs. Lila paced the room, muttering under her breath, running her hands through her hair as she tried to think of a way out. But there wasn't one. She knew it. After what felt like an eternity, she stopped and turned to me, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Fine," she choked out. "I'll sign. Just don't release the video." "Good choice," I said flatly, feeling nothing. The next day, we met with the lawyers. She signed the papers, giving up her claim to the house. As I watched her walk out of the lawyer's office, her shoulders slumped, her face pale, her eyes red and swollen, I thought I'd feel euthanasia. But I didn't. All I felt was emptiness. Slumped, looking like a shell of the woman I used to know. For a brief moment, I thought about what could have been. How things might have turned out if she hadn't cheated, if she hadn't destroyed everything we built together. But those what-ifs didn't stick around long. I reminded myself of what she'd done, and those thoughts disappeared just as quickly as they came. I had the house. I had my revenge. But did any of it actually make me feel better? Not really. It was a Ethane, sure, but it was hollow. Still, at least I knew Lila wouldn't walk away unscathed. At least I knew she'd have to carry the weight of her betrayal for the rest of her life. After Lila signed the papers and handed over her rights to the house, I thought I'd feel something, vindication, satisfaction, maybe even some twisted sense of triumph. But what I actually felt was this unbearable emptiness. Like I'd been dragging around a heavy weight for so long, and now that it was gone, there was nothing left to fill the void. The win was fleeting. On paper, I'd come out ahead. I had the house, Lila was out of my life, and I'd hit her where it hurt the most. But deep down, it didn't feel like much of a win. That hollow ache refused to go away. It followed me everywhere, eating away at me, making me question if any of it had been worth it at all. I couldn't stay in that house anymore. Every inch of it was suffocating, filled with memories I didn't want to relive. The kitchen, where we'd once cooked meals together, now only reminded me of the nights I ate alone while she was out with Jason. The living room, where we'd cuddled and laughed at stupid movies, had turned into a graveyard of memories I wanted to bury. That house had become a monument to everything that had gone wrong. Every betrayal, every lie, every moment I wished I could erase. Staying there wasn't an option. I had to let it go. So, I made the decision. I was going to sell the house. I didn't need it anymore, and honestly, I didn't want it. Selling it felt like the only way to truly start over, to finally close the chapter on Lila and everything she'd left behind. But putting it on the Ryanette wasn't as simple as I thought. Every time I walked through the door, every time I showed it to a potential buyer, the memories came rushing back. The what-ifs haunted me. What if Lila hadn't cheated? What if we'd actually worked through our problems instead of letting them rot? What if I hadn't let myself turn into someone I barely recognized? The guy who blackmailed his wife and slept with her mother out of revenge. Those questions haunted me, but I didn't let them stop me. I threw myself into distractions, work, drinking, anything to keep my mind from spiraling. But eventually, it all caught up to me. One night, after more drinks than I could count, I found myself sitting in that empty house, staring at the walls, surrounded by silence that was so loud it hurt. That's when I realized I couldn't keep going like this. The house, the memories, the constant reminders, they were suffocating me. I knew I needed to change something. I started reaching out to old friends. People I hadn't spoken to in years because Lila and I had drifted into our own bubble. It felt strange at first, like I'd forgotten how to be myself outside of that marriage. But reconnecting with them was like grabbing a lifeline. They didn't judge me for what happened. They just listened, reminded me of who I used to be, and tried to help me see that life after divorce wasn't the end of the road. One night, sitting around a fire with some old friends, my buddy Ryan turned to me and said, "You know what you need, man? You need to get the hell out of here. Clear your head. Take a trip. Just get away from all this crap for a while." First, I laughed it off. A trip? My life was a train wreck, and he thought going on vacation was going to fix that? But the more I thought about it, the more it started to make sense. What did I have to lose? The house was already in the process of being sold. My life here felt like a wasteland, and staying put wasn't doing me any favors. Maybe he was right. Maybe getting away was exactly what I needed. I started looking into it. Europe, somewhere far enough to feel like a fresh start, but not so far that it felt like I was running away completely. I figured I'd do the cliché thing: Italy, France, Spain, maybe even Scotland. These were places I'd always talked about visiting but never had the chance to. Now, I had the money, I had the time, and I had nothing tying me down anymore. The decision was made. I was going to pack my bags, leave the past behind, and figure out who I was outside of the mess Lila had left me in. It wasn't just about running away, it was about breaking free. From the house, from the memories, from the person I'd become while I was trapped in that toxic cycle. Selling the house was like ripping off a bandage. It hurt, but it was necessary. Once the paperwork was finalized, I felt like I could breathe for the first time in ages. The house that had once been a symbol of everything I thought I had was now just a reminder of betrayal. Letting it go wasn't easy, but it was the first real step towards starting over. As soon as the money hit my account, I didn't hesitate. I booked a flight to Europe and got the hell out of there. Landing in Italy was like stepping into a completely different world. Everything was vibrant, the colors, the sounds, the people. It was so alive, so far removed from the suffocating weight of home. I didn't have much of a plan, just a rough idea of where I wanted to go: Rome, Florence, Venice. I figured I'd start with the obvious spots and see where the journey took me. For the first time in what felt like forever, I wasn't weighed down by the past. I wandered through ancient streets, stood in awe of breathtaking art, and sat in little cafes watching the world go by. There was something liberating about being a nobody, just another face in the crowd, another traveler. Here, I wasn't Ethan, the guy whose wife cheated on him. I was just me, and for once that felt like enough. As the days turned into weeks, I started to feel something shift inside me. The anger and bitterness were still there, but they weren't everything anymore. It was like the farther I got from that house, from Lila, the lighter I felt. I started remembering who I used to be, the guy who loved adventure, who embraced life. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like I might actually find myself again. And that's when I met her. In Florence, in one of those small, tucked away in one of those art galleries that seemed to be a well-kept secret among locals. I was wandering aimlessly, letting the day carry me. That's when I saw her, Elena. She was sitting in the corner, completely engrossed in her work, her brush dancing across a canvas. Her dark hair was loosely pulled back, strands falling around her face, and her hands were smeared with paint. She had this effortless grace, like she lived in her own world, untouched by the burdens most people seem to drag around. Something about her captivated me immediately. Maybe it was how different she felt from everything I'd just been through. Lila had been cold, methodical, and distant. But Elena? She radiated warmth, chaos, and life. It was like she embodied everything I didn't even know I was searching for. Before I realized it, I was walking toward her, drawn in like gravity wouldn't let me go. And then we were talking. She was an artist, of course. Italian, born and raised right in the heart of Florence. She lived in this small apartment above the gallery and spent her days immersed in her art. Painting, sculpting, creating beauty out of nothing. She had this way of seeing the world that felt entirely new to me, like she could find wonder in the simplest, most overlooked details. We talked for hours that day about her art, about life, about nothing in particular. By the time we said goodbye, I knew I had to see her again. Over the next few weeks, Elena and I were inseparable. We wandered through Florence together, exploring its hidden corners, visiting galleries, or sitting by the river as the city buzzed around us. She had this way of making everything feel lighter, like life wasn't supposed to be this heavy, relentless struggle. She didn't care about my past. She didn't care about my baggage. She was just present, fully and completely, and for the first time in years I realized I could be too. Elena helped me find pieces of myself I thought were lost forever. She showed me that happiness wasn't this abstract, unattainable thing. It was simple, and it was here, waiting to be embraced. With her, I remembered what it felt like to smile without bitterness, to laugh without resentment. She taught me it was okay to let go of the pain, the grudges, and the anger that had consumed me. She reminded me that starting fresh wasn't just possible, it was necessary. One night, we were sitting on the rooftop of her apartment, the city stretching out below us as the sunset painted the sky in hues of gold and orange. Elena had her sketchbook in hand, absently doodling, while I leaned back, feeling a kind of peace I hadn't known in years. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about Lila, or the house, or the revenge. I wasn't even thinking about the past. I was just there, in the moment, with her. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't angry anymore. The bitterness I'd carried for so long, the fire that had fueled me through all the chaos, it wasn't there anymore. I turned to Elena and said, "You know, I never thought I'd be able to let it all go. The anger, the bitterness, I thought it was just part of me now. But being here with you, I don't feel any of it anymore. She smiled, that effortless, radiant smile that could melt away the weight of the world. Life is too short to hold on to pain, Ethan, she said softly. If you don't let it go, it'll consume you. She was right. I'd spent so much time letting Lila's betrayal define me, letting it shape who I was and how I saw the world. But here I was, halfway across the world, with a woman who'd reminded me that I was still capable of joy, of love, of living. My happiness didn't have to come from making Lila pay for what she'd done. It didn't have to come from revenge or bitterness. It came from me, from my choice to move forward, to let go of the pain, and to embrace life again. By the time my trip was coming to an end, I was a different person. The man who boarded that plane to escape his past wasn't the same man who was now preparing to go back home. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't bitter. I wasn't weighed down by the person I'd become in the aftermath of everything Lila had done. I was free from her, free from the house, free from the version of myself I didn't want to be anymore. And I had Elena to thank for that. She didn't just help me see that life was still full of possibility. She helped me see that I was still full of possibility. She showed me that I wasn't broken beyond repair, that I could still find happiness even after all the pain and betrayal. She didn't just help me rediscover life. She helped me rediscover myself.